Welcome to Detective Duo, where classic mysteries come alive, from quiet villages to secret meetings with Tommy and Tuppence themselves. Do remember to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It was the sort of quiet London afternoon that seemed determined to behave itself. The clock on the mantel chimed 4 in a tone of well-bred restraint, the kettle hummed faintly on the gas ring, and Tuppence Beresford was waging a half-hearted battle with the dust on the bookshelves of South Audley Mansions. She had reached the volume marked From the Grand Fleet to Whitehall when the bell rang, one of those discreet, hesitant rings that suggested an apology rather than a visit. "Whoever it is," she murmured, "it's not the gas man." When she opened the door, the corridor presented a young man who looked as if he had come from somewhere important and meant to go back there as quickly as possible. His suit was correct, but too tight in the shoulders. His collar wilted slightly. His hair had the stubborn neatness of someone who had brushed it thrice since lunch and still felt unpresentable. "Mrs. Beresford?" he stammered. "Yes," said Tuppence, taking him in at a glance, the nervous eyes, the briefcase clutched as though it contained the crown jewels, the faint air of fear clinging to his coat like London soot. "And you are Evans," he said, though the name seemed to catch in his throat. "Clark, Whitehall. I was told, well, yes, it's you." "Is it?" said Tuppence brightly. "How fascinating. Do come in, Mr. Evans, before you forget what you came for." He obeyed, stepping into the sitting room as if expecting the walls to take notes. Tuppence poured tea with the brisk efficiency of a woman who found ordinary politeness far duller than danger. Evans perched on the edge of the chair, looking at the tea tray as though it might be wired for sound. "I shouldn't really be here," he said, "but I was told, by someone, that you and your husband could be trusted." "Flattering," Tuppence said, "though between ourselves that's an unverified rumour. Sugar?" He didn't answer. His gaze kept flicking to the window, then to the door. Finally, with a swallow, he opened his briefcase. Inside was a sealed brown envelope, unmarked except for a single wax impression, an unfamiliar crest, perhaps a stylized bird. "I was ordered to deliver this," he said, "but the man I was to give it to, he's gone, vanished, and then I was followed." Tuppence's eyes gleamed with immediate satisfaction. It was, at last, something happening. "Followed by whom?" she asked. He shook his head. "A man in a grey hat, or 2 men. I'm not sure anymore. I haven't slept properly for 3 nights. They told me to keep quiet, but after what I saw—" He stopped, glancing at the window again. "I can't speak of it here." "Well, you're certainly making it sound thrilling," said Tuppence, leaning forward. "Why not tell me the part you can speak of?" He opened his mouth, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he fumbled in his pocket and drew out a scrap of paper. The handwriting was small and neat, but hurried, ink blotted in one corner. He placed it on the tea table between them. "If anything happens," he whispered, "remember this. Sparrow sings at 11. Before Tuppence could ask whether the sparrow in question was political, zoological, or metaphorical, he was already rising, his hands trembling. "I must go. They'll have noticed. You, please, forget I was here." "Impossible," Tuppence said. "I adore inconvenient people." He gave her a look, half gratitude, half terror, and bolted. The door closed with a sound much too loud for his delicate nerves. Tuppence stood still for a long moment, the room vibrating faintly with his panic. Then she sighed, looked down at the cryptic message and murmured, "And to think I was just about to polish the brass." She examined the envelope he'd left behind, not the one he'd shown her, but the one still sitting on the chair, half buried under his coat, thick, official, and most certainly forgotten. She resisted, heroically, the temptation to open it. When Tommy came in half an hour later, whistling cheerfully and carrying the Evening Standard, he found his wife seated at the table, the untouched tea growing cold beside her, and a faintly triumphant smile playing around her mouth. "All right," he said cautiously. "What's happened?" "Someone has died or disappeared or committed high treason," said Tuppence. "I'm not sure which yet, but I've been having a delightful afternoon." "Who's responsible?" "A very nervous young man from Whitehall named Evans, or so he claimed. He came, muttered about envelopes, dropped this delightful puzzle." She slid the scrap of paper across the table, "and vanished." Tommy took the note, frowning. "Sparrow sings at 11. What is it supposed to mean?" "It means," said Tuppence with relish, "that we're in for something much more interesting than dusting." Tommy looked round at the disarray of teacups. "Well, it's about time, but you might have waited for me to come home before entertaining strange men with secrets." "I didn't entertain him," Tuppence protested. "He entertained me, and he left this." She handed over the envelope. Tommy turned it over thoughtfully. The seal was official, though the emblem wasn't familiar. "Could be Foreign Office, could be forgery." "Could be breakfast reading," said Tuppence, "but I thought it might be bad manners to open government property." Tommy grinned. Conscience suddenly grown stronger. "Only the sense of drama. It's always better to open mysterious envelopes with witnesses present." He set it aside. "Before we turn into amateur spies, suppose we find out whether your Mr. Evans really exists." "That's easy," said Tuppence. "Ring Whitehall. Ask for the list of clerks who look nervous and carry umbrellas." Tommy went to the telephone while Tuppence tidied the teacups and mentally drafted headlines. She half expected him to laugh when he came back. Instead, he looked oddly sober. "They say there's no Evans in that department. Never was." Tuppence paused mid-motion. "Well," she said finally, "either he's lying or the entire civil service is." Tommy lifted an eyebrow. "And which do you think more likely?" "I haven't decided, but the envelope's real, and so was his fear." She glanced out of the window as she spoke, a habit from years of experience. Across the street, near the railing by the park, a man in a grey hat was standing motionless, pretending to light a cigarette that had gone out minutes ago. Tuppence's smile vanished. "Tommy," she said quietly, "I think our Mr. Evans was telling the truth." Tommy crossed to the window, followed her gaze, and nodded slightly. "Well," he said under his breath, "looks as if Whitehall has finally come to South Audley Mansions." He drew the curtains in one smooth motion. Tuppence, still holding the forgotten scrap of paper, whispered the words again, half to herself. "Sparrow sings at 11. Then, with that unmistakable gleam that always preceded mischief, she turned to her husband. "Tommy, darling," she said, "I think we ought to buy a new notebook. Something tells me we're about to start another case." Outside, the man in the grey hat dropped his unlit cigarette, crushed it beneath his shoe, and disappeared into the traffic. "Evans," said Tommy Beresford, balancing the receiver between shoulder and ear. "Yes, that's right. Civil Service Office, Whitehall. A junior clerk, possibly transferred recently. No, I don't know which department. Pick one that looks underpaid and overworked." He listened, drumming his fingers on the table while Tuppence, opposite him, was examining the mysterious scrap of paper again under the reading lamp. The secretary's polite tone on the line became steadily cooler. "I see," Tommy said at last. "So there's no clerk of that name in any department. Yes, I'll hold." He glanced at his wife. "They're checking again, probably in case I've invented him." "I should hope so," said Tuppence. "I'd rather not be the only person in London who's seen a ghost with a briefcase." Tommy gave a dry little laugh. "Thank you. Quite certain. Yes, of course. Forget I asked." He hung up, his expression thoughtful. "Well?" "They say he doesn't exist," he said. "Never has. Whitehall produces a good many things, but apparently not Evans." Tuppence leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Then either he's lying, or he's one of those people the government pretends not to employ. You know, the kind who file papers that aren't supposed to exist." Before Tommy could reply, the doorbell rang again. The sound was brisk this time, official. Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "And that, darling, will be Act 2. Tommy opened the door to find a square-built man in a bowler hat whose very posture smelled of Scotland Yard. "Mr. Beresford," he said, flashing an identification card. "Inspector Grant. May I come in?" The name carried weight. Grant of the Yard had turned up in a few discreetly reported espionage cases. Tommy stepped aside. The inspector entered with a kind of deliberate courtesy, the politeness of a man who knew he could ruin your morning if he wished. "I understand," he began, removing his hat, "that a certain Mr. Evans called on you this afternoon." Tuppence's tone was bright, but wary. "Indeed he did. Delightful company. He drank my tea, left me his umbrella, and possibly got himself murdered. Do sit down." Grant's eyes flicked to her, registering both sarcasm and intelligence. "I take it you've heard the evening news, then?" "We've heard nothing," said Tommy. "What's happened?" A man answering Evan's description was found dead near St. James's Park just after dusk. No marks of violence. The doctor calls it heart failure, but he paused, studying them. His briefcase was missing. The silence lengthened. The clock ticked with exaggerated precision. Then he wasn't simply nervous, said Tuppence quietly. He was frightened for a reason. Grant inclined his head. Quite possibly. Tell me everything he said. Tommy and Tuppence gave a concise account. The nervous visit, the envelope, the cryptic message, the sudden flight. Grant listened without interruption, then nodded toward the side table where the envelope lay. May I? Tommy handed it over. The inspector examined the wax seal, frowning. Unfamiliar crest. Not official, but looks like someone imitating something official. We'll have to open it. He slit the envelope carefully, drew out a single sheet of blank note paper, and whistled. Nothing. Either it was switched, or meant as a decoy. Tuppence pursed her lips. So the real contents are missing, the courier's dead, and the only clue is a bird with musical ambitions. Grant's mouth twitched. You could put it that way. I'll have to take this scrap of paper as evidence. You'll keep quiet about the visit, if you please. Official secrecy. Of course, said Tommy blandly. We'll be models of discretion. After Grant left, Tuppence went to the window again. The street lamps gleamed on wet pavement. Tommy, this is bigger than it looks, he smiled faintly. It usually is, but what bothers me is how quickly the yard knew he'd been here. Perhaps they were watching him, said Tuppence, or us. Tommy fetched 2 glasses and poured sherry. Well, if we're being watched, we might as well drink to our observers. She accepted hers with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. To Evans, she said softly, and to the sparrow who sings at 11. The next morning brought drizzle, the kind London specialised in, persistent yet modest. Tuppence insisted on walking to the shops, for information disguised as vegetables. She returned with both, and a gleam of triumph. Tommy, she said, our late Mr. Evans lived in a boarding house off Vauxhall Bridge Road. The greengrocer's wife's cousin is a charwoman there. She says he'd been ill for days, nervous, pale, and constantly scribbling letters that he never posted. Did she happen to keep one? She's not that sort of charwoman, said Tuppence regretfully. But she did mention a visitor last week. A woman. Younger, well-dressed, foreign accent. Tommy looked up sharply. A lover? Possibly. Or someone playing the part. Either way, our clerk was in deep water. They decided on a quiet reconnaissance. The boarding house was a square brick building with a polite front door and curtains that discouraged curiosity. The landlady, Mrs. Hobson, met them with a professional smile and the unmistakable air of someone who enjoyed being questioned. Mr. Evans, she said, such a nice gentleman. Kept to himself, worked for the government, so he said. Poor soul, heart gave out, they tell me. Did he have friends? Asked Tommy. Well, there was a lady came once or twice. I took her for his sweetheart, though she didn't stay long enough for tea. Dark hair, blue hat, very stylish. Left a letter the last time, said it was personal. Tuppence's eyes brightened. You wouldn't happen to have that letter? Why, yes, he never came down for it. I thought the police might want it, but they didn't ask. She fetched it from a drawer, thin blue paper, sealed but unaddressed. Outside, under the narrow awning, Tuppence broke the seal. The contents were disappointingly mundane. A few lines about meeting again, signed Lorna. Well, that's dull, she said. Tommy wasn't so sure. Or very clever. A decoy letter, perhaps. What if the real message was hidden differently? He tilted the page against the light. The faintest hint of writing appeared between the lines. Ink once erased. A name. Denham. Tuppence exhaled. Now that sounds more like it. Back at South Audley Mansions, they spread the letter under the reading lamp. Denham, Tommy repeated. I know that name from somewhere. Foreign Office, I think. Rather too smooth. Always in the gossip columns. Then our Evans may have stumbled onto something he shouldn't, Tuppence said, and someone made sure he couldn't talk. Tommy folded the letter carefully. I'll ring a friend at the ministry. See what they know about a Denham. The call yielded little except caution. Denham's untouchable, the voice warned. Don't get involved, Beresford. Some matters are best left unprobed. Tommy replaced the receiver slowly. Which confirms it, he said. We're definitely going to probe. That evening, Tuppence sat beside the window. notebook in hand, tracing the threads of their growing puzzle. Facts: Evans dead, heart failure questionable, briefcase missing, envelope switched, letter from Lorna, false, but points to Denham. Sparrow sings at 11. She tapped the pencil thoughtfully. If 11 means an hour, perhaps something happens at that time. Tomorrow we watch Whitehall. Tommy agreed. And if nothing sings? Then, she said with determination, we find out who killed the songbird. Below, a car idled longer than necessary before pulling away. Neither of them saw the shadow at the corner that lingered a moment, then turned toward St. James's Park, the same man with the grey hat, lighting another cigarette that never quite caught flame. "Promise me, dear," said Mrs. Crayford, adjusting her pearls with a flutter that was half nerves, half vanity, "that you'll pretend to be impressed. They never show outsiders the strong rooms unless one looks fascinated." Tuppence smiled. "My dear, I was born fascinated. I've been dying to see what the Empire hides behind typewriter ribbons." It was nearly 1 o'clock when they entered the Public Records Office, a building that smelled of paper, polish, and bureaucracy. The corridors ran like arteries through stone. The air held that dry stillness particular to rooms where secrets are stored more carefully than treasure. Clerks moved quietly, as though noise might disturb the ghosts of old ministries. Mrs. Crayford, whose official rank at the Ministry of Supply was modest but whose gossip privileges were vast, swept ahead with the confidence of a woman accustomed to talking her way past signs marked private. They were met by a thin archivist with pince-nez and an expression suggesting that laughter had been abolished by departmental order. "You understand, Mrs. Crayford, that no classified material may be viewed. My dear Mr. Peters," she cooed, "my friend simply adores historical curiosities. We shall be as silent as the grave, won't we, Tuppence?" "Positively sepulchral," murmured Tuppence. They were shown through to a high-ceilinged room lined with filing cabinets that stretched like regimented soldiers. The hum of typewriters in the adjoining office formed a steady, secretive rhythm. Dust motes drifted in shafts of weak light. The smell of carbon paper and ink hung thickly. While Mrs. Crayford peppered the archivist with questions about Tudor charters, Tuppence's attention wandered, as planned. A clerk and a grey-haired man in uniform stood at a side table, speaking in tones low but urgent. She caught only fragments: Whitehall clearance, Operation Finch, ultra-confidential. Her pulse quickened. Finch. A bird again. Evans's note had read "Sparrow sings at 11." Mrs. Crayford was now expounding on the importance of preserving departmental memos from 1919. Tuppence contrived to drift nearer the whispering pair, her gloved hand trailing along the cabinet handles as if admiring their polish. "Finch was never authorized beyond Section C," the uniformed man was saying. "Denham pushed it through himself." Denham. Again that name. A. Denham. The clerk noticed her, coughed meaningfully, and the two men moved away. Tuppence bent as if adjusting her handbag and saw on the desk a discarded carbon copy, half-rolled from the typewriter. She read only a line before Mrs. Crayford called her, but that was enough. Responsibility accepted by A. Den. Tuppence coughed delicately, dropped her handkerchief over the page, and retrieved both in one graceful motion. Into the handbag it went, beside the peppermints. "Splendidly educational," she told Mrs. Crayford a few minutes later, as they emerged into the pale daylight. "I feel more historically informed already." Mrs. Crayford looked pleased. "You see? Nothing thrilling. Just endless files about pensions and poultry supplies." "Exactly," said Tuppence, so reassuring. Meanwhile, Tommy Beresford was lunching at the Cavalry Club with Colonel Linton, a man who had been in intelligence long enough to distrust anyone who claimed to have retired from it. "Evans, you say?" Linton repeated, carving his roast with military precision. "Yes, I remember the name from some courier lists. Temporary postings during the war. Bright chap, kept his head down. If he's dead, someone wanted him quiet." "You've heard of a project called Operation Finch?" asked Tommy. Linton's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Where did you pick that up?" "Oh, here and there," Tommy said lightly. The colonel set down his glass. "Best forget it, old man. Some files kill reputations before they kill men. Finch was one of those little arrangements nobody's supposed to remember. Diplomatic exchanges that got untidy. If Denham's mixed in, tread carefully. He's protected and he bites. Tommy smiled. I've been bitten before. Yes, but you're married now. Different stakes. Tell your wife to leave the archives to the archivists. I'll pass it on, said Tommy, knowing perfectly well that Tuppence would do nothing of the sort. At 4 o'clock, Tuppence was back at South Audley Mansions, spreading the rescued carbon on the dining table like a conjurer unveiling a trick. The sheet was faint, but the typewriter ink caught the light at certain angles. She whispered, half to herself, Operation Finch, responsibility accepted by A. Denham, transmitted to... The rest was smudged beyond reading. When Tommy came in, smelling faintly of cigar smoke and suspicion, she greeted him with the satisfaction of a cat that had just discovered the cream jug. Before you scold me, she began, I didn't mean to steal it. It leapt into my handbag. He bent over the page, reading. Denham again, then we're on the right scent. Finch must be the code name for something official, she said. Perhaps the sparrow and the finch belong to the same aviary. Tommy grinned despite himself. Let's hope we don't end up the birds stuffed and mounted. They spent an hour cross-referencing names in the old War Office directories Tommy kept from his intelligence days. The entries for Denham were vague. Liaison, Overseas Division, followed by a promotion and a silence. The telephone rang. Tuppence, nearest, lifted the receiver. South Audley Mansions, Mrs. Beresford speaking. A pause, then a male voice, precise and unfamiliar. Evans? I beg your pardon? Another pause, short, sharp, then the same voice, lower. Evans, this is Sparrow, 11 confirmed. Before Tuppence could answer, the line went dead. Tommy looked at her in astonishment. What did he say? She repeated the words slowly. He stared at the instrument as though it might still yield the voice. A coded call, intended for Evans's line. Which now rings in our sitting room, said Tuppence. How very convenient. They exchanged a long look, half excitement, half apprehension. So, Tommy said at last, either someone thinks Evans is alive, or someone wants to see who answers for him. Tuppence replaced the receiver gently. Either way, Tommy, I think our singing sparrow has just joined the conversation. Outside, the clock of St. George's struck 5 with solemn decorum, as though marking the moment the Beresfords officially re-entered the service of intrigue. You can always count on Lady Pettigrew, said Tuppence, studying the gilt-edged invitation card, to mix diplomacy with the best chicken soufflé in London. Tommy, knotting his tie with faint resignation, replied, and you can always count on Claridge's to hide the intrigue behind the flower arrangements. It was true enough. The grand ballroom of Claridge's glowed that evening like a jewel box of empire. Crystal chandeliers, polished brass, the murmur of expensive voices. The charity dinner in aid of the Anglo-European Cultural Fund was the sort of event where diplomats smiled across tables at men they distrusted, and women in diamonds pretended to be deaf whenever politics drifted too near the soup. Lady Pettigrew, a vision in mauve silk, fluttered toward them with both arms extended. My dears, how divine that you could come. The Prime Minister sent regrets, so you'll have to sparkle in his place. We'll do our inadequate best, said Tuppence, accepting a glass of champagne. She noticed at once that the seating plan had been constructed with malice aforethought. Their table was tucked close to the dais, near enough to observe, far enough to be ignored. Lady Pettigrew lowered her voice. You'll like the company. That's Sir Michael Harcourt from the Foreign Office, and that, she nodded toward a tall man with silver dark hair and immaculate evening dress, is Arthur Denham. Everyone says he's destined for cabinet, provided the newspapers don't find out who he's really seeing. Tuppence murmured, I've been wanting to meet Mr. Denham. His name keeps fluttering through our affairs like a rather unpleasant moth. Tommy's expression sharpened, though he only said, Let's see how it looks in daylight before we judge the plumage. The dinner progressed with military precision. Consommé, sole, pheasant. Conversation ebbed and flowed like a tide under chandeliers. Denham proved charming in the practiced way of men who use charm as currency. He spoke fluently about European trade, youth rehabilitation, and the importance of discretion in public service, 3 topics that could each conceal a multitude of sins. When the toast to His Majesty's government was proposed, Denham rose with the others. His hand, lifting the glass, trembled slightly at the word loyalty, only slightly, but Tuppence saw it, and Tommy, glancing sideways, did too. Denham's smile froze for a second before returning to its polished brilliance. "To loyalty," he said evenly, "the rarest commodity of all." Lady Pettigrew clapped her hands in girlish approval. "So noble, so right." Tuppence hid a smile. "And so rehearsed," she murmured under her breath. During the speeches that followed, waiters glided among the tables with professional invisibility. One, a thin fellow with a discreet expression, paused behind Denham, slipped a folded telegram onto the tablecloth, and withdrew. Denham's eyes flicked down, then up. He didn't touch it. 10 minutes later, another waiter appeared and removed it as silently as it had come. Tuppence's gaze followed the motion. The envelope was cream, unmarked, and she thought she caught the faint glint of a bird-shaped seal, perhaps only her imagination, but her pulse quickened all the same. Denham resumed his conversation with Lady Pettigrew as if nothing had occurred, yet a muscle worked in his jaw, betraying strain. Tommy leaned close. "Notice the handoff?" "Of course," she murmured, "but whether it's espionage or flirtation remains to be seen." He smiled faintly. With Denham, perhaps both. Between the courses and polite applause, Tommy excused himself. The corridor outside was hushed, carpeted in secrecy. Staff moved like shadows through doors that opened soundlessly. At the far end, by the cloakroom, a figure stood under a wall sconce, a man in a grey hat. The same man who had lingered near their flat days before. Tommy stepped forward. The man turned, feigning surprise, then retreated through a service door marked private. Tommy followed a few paces, but the door led into a maze of stairways and delivery halls. By the time he reached the courtyard, the figure had vanished into the London night. When he returned, Tuppence greeted him with a look that said she already knew he'd found something, and that it had annoyed him. "Our friend in the grey hat," he said quietly, resuming his seat. "So he does enjoy a good soiree," she murmured. "Perhaps he's cultivating Denham as well." "Or watching who else does." The speeches concluded amid delicate laughter. Denham rose, exchanged murmured farewells, and crossed the room. Tuppence noticed he didn't take his coat from the attendant himself. One of the staff handed it to him already prepared, as though pre-arranged. Lady Pettigrew fanned herself with her programme. Such a clever man, that Denham, though one feels he might have rather too many clever enemies. "Or not enough honest friends," said Tuppence. Later, in the lounge where coffee and brandy replaced the formalities of dinner, they found themselves drawn into a circle of diplomats discussing post-war budgets. Tuppence, outwardly serene, watched Denham through the mirrored wall. He stood near the grand piano, speaking to Sir Michael Harcourt with an intensity disguised as charm. "I gather Harcourt's his superior," Tommy murmured. "Then he's also the man who signs the clearance for Operation Finch," Tuppence replied. "Mrs. Crayford's whispers are proving more useful by the minute." Harcourt excused himself presently and left the room. Denham's expression darkened for a heartbeat before smoothing again. He finished his drink and set the glass down with the precision of someone controlling his temper. At that moment, Lady Pettigrew reappeared, brimming with gossip. "Arthur, darling, you must tell Mrs. Beresford about your marvellous speech at the Guildhall. So inspiring about loyalty and integrity." Denham turned toward Tuppence, his smile tight. "Ah, yes, integrity, the fashion of the season." Their eyes met, polite but measuring. Tuppence said pleasantly, "You spoke as though loyalty were a thing to fear rather than admire." "Fear, Mrs. Beresford," he said softly, "is often the companion of loyalty. One cannot serve two masters without dreading both." It was an odd remark, too pointed for drawing-room banter. Tuppence inclined her head, letting silence do the work. Tommy arrived with fresh coffee, breaking the tension. "We're talking of loyalty, are we? Dangerous topic at a dinner table. Half the room might resign by dessert." Denham laughed, but there was little mirth in it. Perhaps they should. An hour later, the guests began their polite exodus. The Beresfords thanked Lady Pettigrew, accepted the inevitable promise of luncheon very soon, and stepped into the mild night. The street lamps along Brook Street gleamed on black cars and polished shoes. Behind them, the last strains of the orchestra faded like a sigh. They walked toward the corner where their taxi waited. Tuppence glanced back just once, Denham was emerging from the hotel entrance, speaking sharply to the same waiter who had delivered the telegram. The envelope was now gone. Tommy held the door for her. "You saw it too?" "Yes," she said quietly. "And if I'm not mistaken, that waiter was no waiter. His shoes were ministry issue." Tommy smiled grimly. "You notice everything, don't you?" "I'm married to a man who never tells me enough," she replied. "One must collect one's own clues." The taxi pulled away. For a moment neither spoke. London rolled past, lit windows, policemen's whistles, the steady rhythm of a city pretending not to listen. Then Tommy said, "When Evans died, someone took his briefcase. Tonight, someone delivers a telegram to Denham in public and removes it before he can read it. Same pattern, information exchanged, erased, or redirected." "And somewhere in between," said Tuppence, "a sparrow sings at 11. He turned to her. "You think the message we intercepted, Sparrow 11 confirmed, was meant for Denham?" "Or from him," she said. "But what worries me is the timing. It's nearly 11 now." The taxi slowed at a crossing. Big Ben's distant chime floated over the rooftops. Deep, deliberate 11 strokes. They exchanged a look. In the faint light from the street, Tuppence's face was thoughtful but determined. "Well," she said, "the Sparrow's on schedule." Tommy leaned back, exhaling. "Then we'd better find out who taught it to sing." Behind them, unnoticed, another cab drew away from Claridge's, its passenger hidden by the brim of a grey hat. "The following morning at 11 o'clock, said Tuppence, glancing at the clock above the great arched roof of Victoria Station, "and not a sparrow in sight." Tommy folded his newspaper. Perhaps he's migrated to the continent. The concourse seethed with purposeful life. Porters trundling luggage carts, soldiers in uniform taking leave with laughter that sounded too loud, women in hats like paper boats drifting on a sea of commuters. The smell of hot metal, tobacco and railway steam mingled with perfume and impatience. The Beresfords had taken up position at a tea stall overlooking platforms 2 and 3, the very heart of Whitehall's daily migrations. Tuppence sipped her tea, terrible, grey and thrillingly official. "It feels exactly like 1915 again," she said. "Only then we were chasing spies disguised as nannies. Now it's undersecretaries with expense accounts." Tommy smiled. "Progress." At that moment, Tuppence's gaze sharpened. There, near the newspaper kiosk. Arthur Denham stood among the travellers, immaculate even in the utilitarian light. He carried a slim leather portfolio and spoke briefly to a woman in a dark blue hat with a veil drawn low. The exchange was unremarkable. A nod, a murmured word, an envelope passed with the neat discretion of a handshake. Denham checked his watch, then moved toward the Dover Express, blending into the departing crowd. Tommy rose casually. "I'll take the platform. You shadow the lady." "Delightful," said Tuppence. "I always wanted to play Mata Hari without the tragic ending." She slipped after the woman as easily as smoke, weaving through the throng with the grace of long practice. The woman's pace was brisk, her gloved hand tightening on the envelope. She paused once to glance behind, too quickly, and went on toward the side exit where taxis idled. Outside, a gust of wind lifted the veil. Tuppence caught a glimpse of fair hair and a pale, strained face, older than she had expected. At the curb, the woman fumbled for her purse. The envelope slipped, landed flat on the pavement. Tuppence stooped to retrieve it, but the woman snatched it up with an apologetic smile. "Clumsy of me." Their eyes met for a fraction too long. Then the woman climbed into a cab and vanished into the traffic. Meanwhile, Tommy boarded the Dover train just as the guard's whistle blew. Denham took a seat near the middle of the carriage, unfolded a Times, and appeared the picture of respectability. Tommy entered the next compartment, pretending to consult the departures board printed on the carriage wall. The train jolted forward. Steam clouded the windows. Tommy moved quietly through the corridor, pausing just beyond the half-open door of Denham's compartment. The Undersecretary was on the telephone, one of the new compartment instruments reserved for senior officials, speaking in tones too low to carry. Tommy caught only fragments. "Courier, safe passage. Harcourt insists." The train gathered speed. When Denham finally replaced the receiver, he folded the Times, slipped it into his briefcase, and stood. Tommy retreated at once. Denham alighted at the very next stop, a minor suburban platform, barely a quarter-hour outside London. Tommy followed, careful not to draw notice. Denham crossed to the opposite platform where another train bound for Dover waited. Someone handed him a fresh ticket at the barrier, a uniformed porter who wasn't a porter at all, but moved with the watchful precision of security servicemen. Denham disappeared into the second train. By the time Tommy reached the platform, the whistle blew again and the carriages slid from sight. He cursed softly. Too smooth by half. He took the next return to Victoria. Tuppence was waiting in the station cafe, a pot of tea between them, and an air of vexed composure. "Well?" she demanded. "Gone to Dover," said Tommy. "Met by an accomplice halfway. What about your lady in blue?" Dropped her letter, retrieved it, and sped off like a guilty conscience. I followed to Sloane Square, but she vanished into a shop. I suspect she realised I wasn't there for the millinery. Tommy poured tea for them both. "Then we're precisely where we started, except for an envelope that changed hands." "Not entirely," said Tuppence, producing something from her bag. "The lady was in such a fluster she dropped the blotting sheet she'd used earlier. A faint impression, see? On the paper, ghostly outlines of words appeared in reverse. Witness, traitor, statement, Whitehall." Tommy whistled. "Evans again." "Exactly. He must have been the witness. And the traitor." She looked up, eyes gleaming. May still be sitting behind a government desk polishing his loyalty speeches. The cafe waiter approached, setting down a fresh pot. The steam rose in lazy curls. Tuppence unfolded her notebook. "If Denham's going to Dover, there's something there worth guarding or retrieving. Perhaps the missing briefcase." Tommy leaned closer. "We can't simply chase him across the channel without knowing what's in play." She reached for the envelope she'd carried since the station. "That's why I brought this. It was the same envelope Denham had passed to the woman, or so Tommy thought until he saw the edge, torn slightly at one corner." "How—" "She dropped a second one," Tuppence said with pride. "Or perhaps meant to. I found it beneath the bench where she waited for her cab. It's blank, but my instincts disapprove of coincidences." Tommy held it to the light. "Empty." "Not entirely," she said. "Look." Under the cafe lamp's yellow glow, faint markings began to appear across the paper, pale blue traces like veins under skin. "Invisible ink," Tommy murmured. They exchanged a conspiratorial smile. Tuppence borrowed the waiter's candle, shielding the flame with her hand, and passed the paper carefully above it. Letters emerged slowly, hesitant at first, then clear. 2 words only. Witness. Traitor. The silence between them was sharper than the clatter of china around them. "So," said Tommy at last, "Evans' message, or part of it. The testimony he was trying to deliver." Tuppence's voice softened. "He died for it. And Denham's running the same trail, tying off loose ends. Which means there's something still missing. The full statement, perhaps. Evans must have hidden it somewhere before he was killed." She nodded. "And the words, 'Sparrow sings at 11. That's not just a code, it's a schedule. Something happens at that hour each day. Messages passed, orders given." Tommy stirred his tea absently. "And we've already seen it twice. Once the call, once the meeting, both at 11. "Then we'll be there a third time," she said firmly. "Wherever Denham's next rendezvous takes place." He smiled. "You realise, my dear, that if you'd gone into government service officially, you'd have been insufferable." Tuppence sipped her tea with serene self-satisfaction. Possibly, but infinitely effective. They left the cafe and crossed to the taxi rank. The station loudspeaker announced departures in a voice that managed to sound both bored and authoritarian. Somewhere nearby, a paperboy was shouting the headlines, "Mystery Death near St. James's Park. Official Denial." Tuppence paused to buy a copy. The story was brief, half suppressed. Evans's death was still ruled natural causes, though certain officials are assisting with inquiries. She folded it neatly and tucked it into her bag. Outside, the wind carried the scent of soot and rain. "If Denham's travelling to Dover," she said thoughtfully, "there's something, or someone, waiting on the other side. Perhaps the real Sparrow." Tommy hailed a cab. "Then we'd better learn what songs sparrows sing in Dover." As they drove off, the newspaper seller turned to pack away his stand. From the shadows near the luggage porters, a man in a grey hat watched the departing taxi, then lifted a match to his cigarette. He drew one puff, dropped it, and crushed it beneath his heel. That evening, at their flat, The Beresfords spread the invisible ink paper on the dining table beside a map of southern England. Evans, Denham, Operation Finch, said Tommy, marking each name in pencil. If we follow Denham to Dover, we risk being out of our depth without official cover. Then we'll make it unofficial, said Tuppence. We'll go as tourists. Married couple off to admire the cliffs and accidentally stumble into treachery. He laughed. Our favourite pastime. She turned serious. Do you think Evans' testimony still exists? The one he called his insurance? If it does, Tommy said, it's the key to everything. The reason he died, the reason Denham's nervous, and the reason someone keeps watching our flat. The telephone rang just then. Both froze. Tommy lifted the receiver. South Audley Mansions. Silence. Then faintly, the same measured voice they'd heard before. Sparrow, 11 tomorrow, Dover. The line went dead. Tuppence exhaled slowly. Well, she said, our invitation's arrived. Tommy replaced the receiver, thoughtful. And I suppose we'd be rude not to accept. She smiled, eyes alight. Darling, it's practically unpatriotic not to. Outside, London's late-night traffic murmured like the city's own nervous heartbeat. Somewhere in the street below, a shadow paused, checked its watch and moved on. Tomorrow, at 11, the game would begin again. Her name's Mrs. Lorna Vale, said Tommy, folding the Times across his knee. War widow, lives alone in Bayswater. Works part-time for a Foreign Office clerical section. Tuppence set down the breakfast tray with exaggerated care. Blue hat, fair hair, nervous hands. Yes, that's her. And she's sitting on more secrets than the cabinet table. They looked at each other over the teapot, the same unspoken thrill passing between them. The chase had acquired a face. By mid-afternoon, the Beresfords were approaching a neat Georgian terrace off Westbourne Grove. Bayswater had the air of a district half asleep after the war, respectable curtains, discreet landladies, and the faint scent of boiled cabbage in the air. Journalists, mind you, murmured Tommy as they climbed the steps. We're doing a series on widows of the war, human interest pieces with a touch of uplift. Tuppence's smile was serene. My dear, I've written worse lies for the Women's Institute newsletter. She rang the bell. The door was opened by a small, self-possessed woman in her late 30s. Her features were delicate, but the eyes, grey and watchful, belonged to someone who had learned not to startle easily. Mrs. Vale, I'm Mrs. Beresford. This is my husband. We wondered if you might spare us half an hour for our article on women who worked in government service during the war. Mrs. Vale hesitated, her hand tightening on the edge of the door. It's not very interesting, I'm afraid. I only did clerical work. Precisely the sort of story we want, said Tuppence warmly. The invisible women who kept the machine turning. After a moment, Mrs. Vale yielded. Come in then, but I warn you, the glamour's all been rationed out. Her flat was small but carefully arranged. Mahogany table, a vase of carnations striving bravely against the London air, and a typewriter on a desk by the window. Yet there was something curiously barren beneath the neatness. The hearth still smelled faintly of burned paper, and a tray of ashes waited by the grate as though an errand had been interrupted. Tuppence noticed it, said nothing, and admired the carnations. Mrs. Vale busied herself with the kettle, the easy gestures of someone accustomed to visitors yet uneasy in her own skin. You must find it odd, she said, wanting to write about people who've done nothing heroic. Heroism, Tuppence replied, is mostly a matter of who writes the report. The woman gave a short laugh. You sound as if you've done a little of it yourself. I once worked in a registry office that lost half its files and still got a citation for efficiency, said Tuppence. We women of the archives must stick together. That won a smile, small but real. Over the thin china cups and the dry rattle of teaspoons, the atmosphere softened. I was with the ministry from 42 to 46, Mrs. Vale said. Typed letters, classified reports, things no one read twice. After my husband was killed at Caen, I kept on. It seemed to matter. Tommy, lounging with deceptive idleness, asked, You must have seen all sorts of documents cross your desk. Too many. I learned early not to notice names. Tuppence's eyes were sympathetic. Still, one remembers some. The silence that followed was like a thread drawn tight. Then Mrs. Vale said, very quietly, There was one, Arthur Denham. Charming, clever, and dangerous in ways I didn't understand until it was too late. Dangerous how? Asked Tuppence gently. Mrs. Vale set down her cup. He was the sort of man who believed himself indispensable. When the war ended, certain files should have been destroyed. Instead, he kept copies. He said the truth would outlive us all. And you? I believed him, for a time. She looked up with sudden defiance. You think I'm a fool? Perhaps I was, but I also knew a good man who died trying to stop him. Evans, murmured Tommy. The name seemed to strike her physically. She gripped the edge of the table. How do you know that name? Tuppence didn't flinch. Because he came to us before he died. He carried a testimony meant to expose a traitor in Whitehall. And you, Mrs. Vale, were the woman he trusted to deliver it. Mrs. Vale's face drained of colour. For a heartbeat she looked ready to deny everything. Then, as though weary of pretense, she nodded. Yes, he gave me the envelope. I never reached the man it was meant for. They were already following me. When I realized he was dead, I burned everything I had, except a copy I made. The truth could destroy the ministry, he said. What truth? Tommy asked. She opened her mouth, but a faint noise interrupted her. A metallic click from the window latch. Her eyes widened. Someone's there. Tommy crossed the room in 2 strides, flung back the curtain. Nothing but the fluttering of a loose blind and the slow traffic beyond. Yet when he looked down, the marks of a hand were visible on the sill, fresh smudges of soot. He turned sharply. Does anyone else have a key? No, but they've been here before. I sometimes find papers moved, drawers half open. I thought I imagined it. Tuppence said briskly, Imagination is never that tidy. Pack what you need, Mrs. Vale. You can't stay here tonight. Mrs. Vale shook her head. No, please, I can't run. They'd know. If I disappear, they'll go after the people helping me, you included. Tommy exchanged a glance with his wife. Then at least let us see you safely somewhere public. A cafe. I'll be all right, she insisted. There's something I must finish first. The copy Evans made, his statement, it's hidden here. I've been waiting for the right moment. Then the moment is now, said Tuppence. Mrs. Vale hesitated, then crossed to the desk. She opened a drawer, drew out the typewriter ribbon spool, and unwound several inches. Between 2 layers of worn fabric was folded a tiny strip of onion skin paper. She held it out. I couldn't destroy it, she whispered. He trusted me. Tuppence took it reverently. The faint purple impressions were almost illegible, but one phrase stood clear enough. A. Denham, liaison, unauthorized transmission, Harcourt aware. Harcourt, said Tommy sharply. Sir Michael Harcourt, Denham's superior. Mrs. Vale nodded. Evans believed both men were involved. He meant to expose them. And paid for it, Tuppence murmured. The kettle began to hiss on the stove, a sudden domestic sound that made them all start. Mrs. Vale went to switch it off. As she did, there came a second noise, the faint creak of the hallway floorboards outside. Tommy moved silently to the door and opened it with a swift jerk. The landing was empty, but the air still quivered as though someone had just retreated down the stairs. He shut it again. We're not alone in this building. Mrs. Vale's composure cracked. I told you, they're watching. I shouldn't have let you come. Tuppence placed a hand on her arm. It's too late for that now. You're not facing it alone. They waited a minute longer, listening. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Then, from the street below, a motorcar started. Smooth, powerful, official. Tommy went to the window, but by the time he looked down, the car had turned the corner. When they finally left, twilight had folded over Bayswater like a shawl. The lamps flickered on one by one, throwing pale circles on the wet pavement. Mrs. Vale stood in her doorway, the blue hat shading her eyes. If you print your article, leave my name out of it, she said quietly. Tuppence smiled sadly. We never write the real names. The woman hesitated, then added, Tell your friend, Evans, that I kept my promise. Tuppence's voice softened. I think he already knows. They turned the corner and did not look back until they reached the end of the terrace. When they did, the upstairs light had gone out. Back at South Audley Mansions, Tommy spread the narrow strip of paper under a magnifying glass. This could blow the lid off Whitehall, he said. If it's genuine. Oh, it's genuine, said Tuppence. I saw the fear in her face. She's been sitting on dynamite for months. He leaned back. Then Denham and Harcourt are both compromised, one covering the other. And one of them still has men following her. Did you notice the car? Government plates, he said grimly. Tuppence nodded. Then tomorrow we go to Harcourt's office. I want to see how a man looks when he realizes the past has sent him a love letter in invisible ink. Before Tommy could reply, the telephone rang. The shrill notes sliced through the quiet like a knife. He picked it up. A pause, then a voice, soft and cultured. "You should tell Mrs. Vale to be careful with her friends." "Who is this?" But the line had already gone dead. Tuppence looked up sharply. "Well?" He replaced the receiver. "Someone who knows where we've been." She went to the window, drawing the curtain a fraction. The street below was empty, save for a single man standing under the lamppost, head tilted as if listening to something only he could hear. The grey hat was unmistakable. Tommy joined her, his voice quiet but firm. "It's official now, Tuppence. We're being followed by the same people who followed Evans." "And by the same people," she said, "who killed him." They watched until the man moved away into the darkness. Only then did Tuppence speak again, very softly. "When I looked into Mrs. Vale's eyes, I saw what happens when truth becomes treason. We can't let her end like Evans." Tommy reached for the slip of paper and folded it carefully. "Then we'd better make sure his testimony is finished." Outside, the city went on with its polite indifference, omnibuses rumbling, shop doors closing, a milk cart clattering past. Yet, in a quiet flat in Bayswater, a woman sat alone beside a dark window, listening for the sound of footsteps returning. She did not have to wait long. "Do stop polishing that badge, Tommy," said Tuppence, watching her husband rub his old Intelligence Bureau credential with unnecessary enthusiasm. "It's 20 years out of date, and you're beginning to look like a man who's about to sell encyclopedias." Tommy slipped the worn leather case into his breast pocket. "Never underestimate the persuasive power of nostalgia, my dear. Bureaucrats are sentimental about paperwork. If we look sufficiently official, no one will imagine we're actually curious." They were walking up Whitehall, that austere corridor of power where marble, silence, and secrecy had achieved an architectural partnership. The morning air smelled of ink, petrol, and freshly scrubbed pavements. Clerks hurried past in dark coats, faces absorbed by memoranda. Tuppence adjusted her hat and said lightly, "I can't believe we're bluffing our way into the records division. There's probably a rule against civilians breathing near those files." "There's a rule against almost everything," Tommy said cheerfully. "Fortunately, rules are often badly filed." Inside, the building was a labyrinth of quiet corridors and ticking clocks. They passed through 2 security desks, Tommy producing his credential with such grave assurance that the guard saluted before noticing the expiry date, and found themselves in a long hall lined with grey filing cabinets, each labelled in stenciled black. War Office, Restricted Transfers, Foreign Liaison, Confidential Operations, Special Clearance, 1943 to 1945. The air was dry, the lighting faintly green. Somewhere in the distance, a typewriter clattered like an impatient conscience. A clerk with hair that matched the cabinets approached, blinking behind spectacles. "May I help you, sir?" Tommy returned the blink with friendly vagueness. "Captain Beresford, formerly attached to Intelligence Liaison. I'm assisting the security section with a cross-reference on wartime code operations. We were told the Finch file had been transferred here for collation." The clerk hesitated. "Operation Finch, you mean? I wasn't aware." "Precisely why we're here," Tuppence interrupted sweetly. "The right hand rarely knows what the left hand files. Do let us check before someone important notices." Something in her bright efficiency disarmed him. He nodded and led them to a side room marked classified, no removal without permit. He produced a ledger, ran a finger down the columns and said, "Cabinet 3C12, shelf 4. You'll have to sign the log." Tommy signed with a flourish. Tuppence added an illegible initial. The clerk withdrew, leaving them alone amid the whispering stillness of paper. Cabinet 3C12 yielded a grey folder stamped Finch, ultra confidential. Inside, the pages smelled of dust and secrecy. Tuppence laid them out carefully on the table. "Listen to this," Tommy read. "Operation Finch. Provisional arrangement for controlled intelligence exchange between His Majesty's government and select neutral nations. Objective: information trade via diplomatic pouch under cultural pretext." Tuppence raised an eyebrow. "So Finch wasn't a bird at all. It was a game." "Indeed. And look, participants listed by code name." He turned a page. "Courier A. Evans, secondary classification, liaison officer A. Denham." Tuppence's expression hardened. There he is again, Denham everywhere we look, fluttering like a moth around a lamp. A faint thrill went through her voice, part disgust, part excitement. She flipped further through the file. There were typed summaries of operations, some with entire paragraphs blacked out with thick strokes of ink. Tommy pointed. This one's interesting. Addendum C, transfer record. See here, Evans's name, Denham's signature, and a final line obliterated completely. Tuppence leaned close. The date's the week before Evans died. Whatever was there, it was the reason. She looked up. Can we copy it? Tommy checked his watch. We've 10 minutes before our luck expires. I'll sketch it, you keep watch. He pulled out a small notebook and began to reproduce the layout in rapid shorthand, his pencil scratching softly. Tuppence moved to the doorway. Through the crack she saw the clerk's shadow drift past, then vanish again. The clock on the wall ticked with exaggerated restraint. Tommy, she whispered, make it quick, someone's coming. He closed the folder and replaced it in the drawer just as footsteps approached. A tall figure filled the doorway, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, eyes as sharp as bayonets. Good Lord, Tommy said softly. Harcourt. Sir Michael Harcourt, head of security liaison, exuded authority like a well-pressed uniform. He took one look at Tommy and gave a short, incredulous laugh. Beresford, by all that's improbable, I'd have wagered you retired to your roses and your wife's patients. Roses survived, said Tommy, recovering. Patients less so. Tuppence offered her hand with perfect composure. Mrs. Beresford, we were merely refreshing our memory of the old days. Harcourt's gaze moved from one to the other, lingering on the half-open cabinet. I see. And your memory required classified material, did it? Purely academic, Tommy said. I'm doing a little informal research into liaison procedures. Harcourt stepped into the room and shut the door behind him. The air seemed to contract. Don't insult me with euphemisms, old boy. Finch is still sealed under Crown order. Who told you it was here? No one, Tommy replied evenly. We followed a trail from Evans' death. You remember Evans? The older man's face didn't move, but a muscle tightened at the jaw. I remember every man who died in my service, Tuppence said quietly. Then you'll also remember that some of them died trying to reveal things better hidden. Harcourt turned his eyes on her. They were pale, intelligent, and cold. You've been talking to Mrs. Vale. It wasn't a question. Yes, Tuppence said. He exhaled slowly, the sound between irritation and resignation. You two never could resist a locked door. If you've any sense left, you'll walk out of here and forget you ever heard the word Finch. Tommy folded his arms. That's difficult when people keep dying for it. Harcourt studied him for a long moment. Then his voice dropped, almost gentle. You want the truth. Finch was an arrangement born of necessity. Trade one secret for another to keep the world from burning twice. It saved lives. But it also gave certain men, Denham among them, more power than conscience. Evans found out the wrong half of the story. He believed he was exposing treason. In fact, he was exposing an authorized sin. And that makes it respectable, Tuppence asked. It makes it survivable, Harcourt said curtly. The living are more dangerous than the dead, Mrs. Beresford. You should remember that. He moved toward the cabinet, locked it with a small key, and pocketed it. Tommy's tone was mild, but his eyes were not. Tell me, Sir Michael, who blacked out the last entry? Harcourt met his gaze. The past did. He opened the door. Now leave before the present catches up with you. They obeyed, because there was nothing else to do. The corridor seemed longer on the way out, the sound of their footsteps too distinct. Once outside, Tuppence said under her breath, He's frightened. Tommy nodded. And when men like Harcourt are frightened, something's rotten under the marble. They walked to the embankment, neither speaking until the noise of traffic made privacy possible. Let's list it, Tuppence said briskly, as though tidying a drawing room after an unpleasant guest. Evans couriered something under Finch, probably evidence of Denham's private dealings. Harcourt knew, covered it, and now both are terrified it will surface. Mrs. Vale was the go-between, and someone's still eliminating witnesses. Tommy slipped a hand into his pocket and produced the notebook. Luckily, I copied enough to keep us unpopular for weeks. Show me. He opened it to his hurried sketch. The blacked-out entry was reproduced by memory. 3 lines, 1 date, a blank space, and a faint impression where the ink had bled through. Under the light of a street lamp it showed a single letter, faint but unmistakable. H. Harcourt, Tuppence whispered. Or someone he's shielding. She looked up at the solemn facade of Whitehall rising behind them. Tommy, we've stirred up something that reaches the top. He smiled grimly. Then we'd better climb carefully. They turned toward the Strand, blending into the crowd of clerks and messengers. Behind them, a man detached himself from a doorway and followed at an easy pace. At the first crossing, Tuppence glanced back and caught the reflection of a grey hat in a shop window. Persistent fellow, our friend, she murmured. Professional pride, Tommy said. He hates loose ends. Then we must be his nightmare, she replied lightly, though her hand tightened on his arm. They walked on. The bells of Westminster began to strike noon, each chime echoing along the river. As the final note faded, a pigeon fluttered down to the pavement near them, an ordinary city bird, grey and unremarkable. Tuppence smiled faintly. Our sparrow sings again, she said, only this time it's telling us we're running out of time. Tommy hailed a taxi. Then let's make the next verse a duet. The cab pulled away towards South Audley Mansions, the reflection of Whitehall shrinking in the rear window like a secret being folded back into its file. Promise me, Tommy, said Tuppence, fastening her necklace before the mirror, that if I ever start hosting political salons, you'll push me quietly under a bus. Her husband, adjusting his bow tie with less enthusiasm, grinned. You're safe enough. No one who still prefers detective stories to diplomacy could ever become a Lady Pettigrew. Tuppence glanced at the gilt invitation card lying on the dressing table. Nevertheless, we're going to hers, and if we're lucky, the champagne will be genuine and the company treacherous. Tommy sighed. You always did equate treachery with good entertainment. Of course, it's the only thing that brings honesty out in people. Fitzroy Square glimmered that evening like a row of pearls under lamplight, elegant, composed, faintly smug. Lady Pettigrew's townhouse was ablaze with chandeliers and conversational ambition. A discreet string quartet played near the marble fireplace. Laughter sparkled over the clink of glasses, and diplomats in evening dress floated through the rooms like well-fed ghosts. Lady Pettigrew herself, in mauve satin and diamonds the size of moral dilemmas, greeted them effusively. Tommy, Tuppence, how divine! I've put you near the fire. Whitehall has turned my salon into Siberia tonight. All these officials talking of loyalty as if it were an old acquaintance they've forgotten how to address. Perfect, said Tuppence. We adore loyalty in small doses. Their hostess lowered her voice. Arthur Denham's here, you know, and Sir Michael Harcourt, looking as if he swallowed the Official Secrets Act whole. Oh, and that pretty widow from Bayswater, Mrs. Vale, is it? Poor soul, she seems positively fragile this evening. Fragility, said Tuppence dryly, can be an excellent disguise. The drawing-room was a portrait of post-war elegance. Damask walls, gilt mirrors, smoke curling upward in genteel spirals. Harcourt stood by the fireplace, glass in hand, speaking in low tones to Denham, whose easy charm looked faintly forced. Across the room, Mrs. Vale sat pale and composed, her blue hat replaced by a simple black one. The Beresfords mingled, listening. Conversations hovered just short of meaning, snatches of policy realignment, continental interests, certain files misplaced. Every phrase was a code without a key. At 9:30, Lady Pettigrew announced coffee. Gather round, dears, diplomacy is so much more digestible with caffeine. Tuppence accepted her cup, smiled her most ingenuous smile, and said clearly, I was nearly late tonight. Terribly vexing. The man from the ministry came by to ask after a rather old envelope, the one Evans gave me, you remember, Tommy. Tommy froze for a fraction of a second before matching her tone. Ah, yes, the envelope. You told him you'd misplaced it. Oh, not misplaced, said Tuppence, just misplaced temporarily. It's quite safe. She said it lightly, almost lazily, but the ripples it caused were anything but. Denham's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing with sudden interest before he caught himself. Harcourt's hand, resting on the mantel, tightened visibly around his glass, and Mrs. Vale, across the room, went white to the lips, setting down her cup with a faint clink. Lady Pettigrew, delighted at what she assumed was an anecdote, beamed. How thrilling! Are we finally to have a proper scandal? Oh, merely administrative, said Tuppence, but apparently there's renewed concern about its contents. Denham approached smoothly, his charm restored. You must forgive official curiosity, Mrs. Beresford. Old cases occasionally resurface, but they're rarely of importance. Then you won't mind if I keep it, said Tuppence lightly. It's become almost sentimental. A flash of steel crossed his eyes before he laughed. Far be it from me to deprive you of nostalgia. Harcourt intervened, his voice low and courteous. My dear lady, official documents can be misunderstood when in private hands. If there's anything truly sensitive, it would be better turned over to the proper department. Tommy smiled blandly. The trouble is, Sir Michael, my wife has never quite decided which department is proper, Tuppence added, and I'm afraid the last man who insisted on retrieving it met with an unfortunate heart condition. That earned her silence, the kind that prickled at the skin. Even Lady Pettigrew blinked, uncertain whether to laugh. Pure coincidence, of course, Tuppence continued. Still, one grows superstitious. Harcourt set down his glass with controlled precision. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Beresford. I usually am, she said softly. Later the guests drifted toward the card tables and the smoking room. The tension remained, an invisible thread stretched across the drawing room. Tuppence, feigning sociable boredom, wandered to the French windows overlooking the square. Mrs. Vale joined her. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. Why did you say that? About Evans's envelope? Because someone in this room needs reminding that he died for it. You don't understand, whispered Mrs. Vale. If they think you have it, you're in danger. Tuppence smiled faintly. My dear, I've been in danger ever since the soup course. Mrs. Vale gripped her arm. It isn't only Denham. Harcourt, he's protecting someone higher still. That envelope could destroy them both. Before Tuppence could reply, Lady Pettigrew's laughter trilled from across the room, breaking the moment. Mrs. Vale withdrew her hand, eyes darting nervously toward Denham, who was watching them from beside the piano. Tommy appeared at Tuppence's elbow. I see you're making friends again. Useful ones, she murmured, but Mrs. Vale's nerves are fraying. I think she's reached the point where truth and fear are indistinguishable. Then we're close, he said quietly. Close enough to make someone desperate, Tuppence replied. By 11, the salon had thinned. The quartet was packing away their instruments. The last of the whisky glasses glinted on silver trays. Lady Pettigrew bade her guests good night at the door, distributing air kisses like ration coupons. Outside, the night had turned hazy, the kind of London mist that swallowed footsteps but left lamplight sharp as knives. The Beresfords' car was waiting at the curb. Tuppence clutched her handbag a little tighter than usual. Inside lay nothing more incriminating than powder and a notebook, but appearances were everything. As Tommy helped her into the car, someone brushed past, lightly, deliberately. A hand darted toward her bag. She turned sharply, catching only a sleeve and the fleeting glint of brass buttons. "Stop him!" Tommy shouted, springing forward. The figure bolted across the square, vanishing between two parked cars. A shout answered from a distant corner, then silence. "Are you hurt?" Tommy demanded, returning. "Only offended," said Tuppence. She opened the bag, inspecting it. "Everything's here, though whoever it was must have thought I carried something worth stealing." A constable appeared, puffing slightly. "Evening disturbance, sir. Did you see the man's face?" "Only his back," Tommy said, "and a ministry issue overcoat." The constable frowned. "You're sure?" "Quite. I used to wear one myself." They returned to the car. Tuppence leaned back, catching her breath. "Well, that's a compliment, isn't it? One doesn't attempt theft unless one believes in the merchandise." Tommy's reply was cut short as his hand brushed something near the step of the car. "What's this?" He picked up a small rectangle of stiff card, a pass, embossed with the government crest. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A. Denham. Tuppence whistled softly. "He's getting clumsy." "Or someone wants us to think he is," Tommy said. "Either way, this ties him neatly to our evening's entertainment." She tucked the pass into her glove. Then perhaps our trap worked after all. The drive back to South Audley Mansions was silent save for the hum of the engine. London at midnight had the air of a stage after the curtain. Streets dimmed, actors vanished, only the echo of the play remaining. Tuppence spoke first. Denham wouldn't risk theft himself, not unless panic had replaced strategy. The envelope bluff hit its mark. Tommy nodded. "He's desperate to retrieve whatever's left of Evan's testimony, and Harcourt's warning us off makes him complicit. They're tied together, one by guilt, one by fear. She leaned her head against the seat, eyes half closed. It's a pity loyalty and treason look so alike in evening dress. He smiled faintly. They always have. The difference is usually in the tailoring. Back at the flat, the telephone was ringing as they entered. Tuppence answered. A woman's voice, breathless. "Mrs. Beresford, it's Lorna Vale. I can't talk long. They've been here again. I'm leaving tonight. If I don't—" The line went dead. Tuppence replaced the receiver slowly. "Tommy, she's running." He frowned. "And if she's running, someone's close behind." They looked at each other, the weight of decision falling between them like a shutter. "Tomorrow," Tuppence said, "we find out what's really in that Finch file. No more warnings, no more hints." Tommy nodded. "Agreed. And if Denham wants to play thief, he'll find we're rather better at it." She smiled, but her voice was grave. "Let's hope we're also better at surviving." Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, tyres whispering on the wet road. Behind its windscreen, a grey hat caught the lamplight and moved on. In Fitzroy Square, the Pettigrew house was dark except for a single lamp in the drawing room. Lady Pettigrew, alone now, gathered the empty glasses onto a tray. The silence of her elegant rooms pressed close. From the window she could see the street lamp opposite, haloed in mist. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, crossed the road and stopped beneath the light. A man's voice drifted faintly upward. "You were right. She has it, or says she does. Denham's furious." Another voice, quieter, replied, "Let her think she's ahead. Tomorrow we end it." Lady Pettigrew closed the curtain quickly, her hands trembling on the fabric. She turned back toward the empty room, whispering into the hush, "What have I invited into my house tonight?" The clock struck 1. The church bell struck 8 as Tuppence stepped from the cab. Its chime rolled through the fog-softened air like a solemn promise. She paused on the pavement, gloved hand tightening around her bag, and looked up at the narrow spire cutting against the dusk. The vestry door was half ajar. Light spilled faintly across the worn stone path, thin, uncertain light from a single gas lamp within. Tommy closed the cab door behind her. "You're sure she said tonight?" 8:30, St. Bartholomew's, the vestry," Tuppence replied. "She sounded frightened but determined. Said she had a confession, written, that it would clear everything." Tommy's eyes searched the empty street. "Or end everything." "Both, perhaps." They entered quietly. The air inside was cool and faintly scented with candle wax and damp wood. Shadows clung to the corners. Dust motes drifted through the weak yellow glow. A single pew near the front was occupied. "Mrs. Vale?" Tuppence whispered. No answer. They approached. The woman sat very still, her head bowed slightly, hands folded over her lap as though in prayer. A folded paper lay beside her, half tucked beneath the worn leather cover of a prayer book. For an instant, Tuppence smiled in relief. "Lorna?" Then she stopped. Something in the angle of the woman's neck, the unnatural stillness, froze her mid-step. "Tommy." He reached forward, touched Mrs. Vale's wrist, and knew. She was dead. Her lips were faintly blue, her skin waxen under the vestry lamp. Beside her on the pew, the faint scent of almonds hung in the air. "Cyanide," Tommy murmured, quick, brutal, and final. Tuppence sank onto the pew opposite, her voice a whisper. She must have known she wouldn't leave here alive. He shook his head grimly. Or someone else knew she wouldn't. They worked in silence for a moment, instinct taking over. Tommy checked the door, the windows, locked from within. No signs of struggle, no overturned objects. The poison had done its work swiftly and cleanly. Tuppence, trembling but composed, reached for the folded paper beneath the prayer book. It was carefully creased, the ink fresh. She unfolded it slowly. "I, George Evans," she read aloud, her voice unsteady, "hereby confess to betraying the trust of His Majesty's government during the course of Operation Finch. I alone was responsible for all unauthorized transmissions. No other official should be held accountable, particularly Mr. Arthur Denham, whose loyalty was beyond reproach." She stopped, blinking through sudden tears. "Tommy? Evans? He's dead. How could this—" Tommy took the paper gently from her hands. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost too deliberate. "It's his signature, all right," he said slowly. "But the phrasing, listen to it. Beyond reproach, His Majesty's government, unauthorized transmissions. That's not Evans' voice. It's bureaucratic theatre. Tuppence looked up. Then it was written after he died. Or before, Tommy said, but under duress. Someone rewrote his words or used his name to bury the truth. She stared at the lifeless woman. And she died trying to bring us this. She must have realized it was a fake. Tommy's face hardened. Or she discovered who forged it. He folded the paper, pocketing it carefully. We'll have to call the police, but not yet. I'd rather they find us discovering her by chance than standing over a forgery. Tuppence nodded numbly. There's something else. She pointed to Mrs. Vale's handbag, lying open at her feet. Inside was a small envelope, empty except for the faint outline of where a folded paper had once been. She carried the real confession here, Tuppence murmured, and swapped it for this one before we arrived. Which means someone met her first. Tommy moved to the door, testing the latch again. The killer used the side entrance, locked it after leaving, perhaps with her key. Efficient, professional. And official, Tuppence whispered. They stood in silence for a while. The church seemed to breathe around them, the faint creak of wood, the settling sigh of old stone. Tuppence looked down at Mrs. Vale's still face, the faint trace of sadness frozen in its lines. She wanted to make amends, Tommy. She thought she could put it right. She came closer than most, he said quietly, but it's not over yet. Tuppence brushed a stray lock of hair from the woman's forehead, a gesture both tender and resolute. She was brave, and they silenced her for it. When she looked up again, her expression had changed. The grief was still there, but behind it, steel. We'll finish what she started. Tommy nodded. We will, but carefully. Whoever forged that confession has reach inside Whitehall. Denham and Harcourt are only part of the machinery. There's someone above them pulling the levers. They left the church quietly and telephoned Inspector Grant from the corner box down the lane. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. Uniforms, flashlights, and polite suspicion. Grant's blunt face appeared out of the gloom. Evening, Beresford. Mrs. Beresford. I might have known when I heard your names mentioned. Pure coincidence, said Tommy. Of course, Grant replied, and I suppose the deceased just happened to know you socially. She came to us, Tuppence said firmly. She had information about Evan's death. She was frightened. Grant eyed them, sighed, and turned toward the vestry. We'll need statements. The doctor says she's been dead about an hour. That puts the time of poisoning around 7:30. She asked to meet us at 8:30, Tuppence said softly. Then someone else kept her appointment first, Grant replied. They followed him inside once more as he examined the scene. His torch beam fell across the pew, the prayer book, the paper. What's this? Tommy handed him the confession. It was beside her. Grant scanned it, snorted. Reads like a press release. You think it's genuine? I think it's convenient, Tommy said. Grant looked up sharply. You mean forged? I mean constructed, said Tommy. Designed to close a file rather than open one. Grant pocketed it. Well, I'll have the lab check it. But if it's a forgery, someone went to a lot of trouble. Typewriter ink's fresh, maybe 2 days old. Tuppence said quietly, then whoever wrote it is still trying to rewrite history. Grant's gaze softened just a fraction. Careful, Mrs. Beresford. This sort of digging gets people buried. She met his eyes. That's already happened, Inspector. Back at South Audley Mansions, the flat felt oppressively quiet. The clocks ticked with exaggerated politeness, and the city sounds outside seemed distant, muffled, as though the world had drawn its curtains. Tuppence sat by the window, staring out at the faint shimmer of headlights. She died because of that paper, Tommy, because she believed it could clear Evan's name. He poured 2 small whiskies, brought her one, and sat opposite. She may still have been right. If the real statement exists, it's somewhere they haven't looked, or can't afford to. Tuppence took the glass absently. You saw her face. She knew the truth, but she also knew she was being watched. Tommy nodded. She must have thought she could outwit them, swap the real confession for the false one, deliver it to us, then vanish. But they reached her first. Yes. He leaned forward. The question is, who gave her the poison? She wasn't the type to take her own life, not with that much resolve in her eyes. Then someone she trusted offered her a drink, or a sweet, something small, quick and final. They sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound. Tuppence broke it softly. It's strange, isn't it? Evans wrote one truth, Denham forged another, and Mrs. Vale died between them. Somewhere in that triangle lies the real betrayal. Tommy's mouth tightened. And I intend to find it. The doorbell rang at 11:30. 3 short rings, 1 long. Tommy frowned. That's not the milkman. Tuppence rose. It might be Grant, perhaps news from the coroner. But when the door opened, it was not Inspector Grant. Arthur Denham stood on the threshold. His expression was composed, his tone polite. "Forgive the hour, Mrs. Beresford. I heard about Mrs. Vale's unfortunate death. Terrible business." Tommy's hand gripped the back of the armchair. "News travels quickly in Whitehall." Denham smiled faintly. "Whitehall is built on quick news. May I come in?" Tuppence hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. He stepped inside, his coat immaculate, his gloves still on. "I wanted to assure you personally that the Ministry regards this as a private tragedy, nothing more. Mrs. Vale was unstable. Grief often warps loyalty." "How convenient," said Tommy. Denham ignored him. "I also hear there's been some confusion about a document, something purporting to be a confession." Tuppence's voice was icy. "You mean the one clearing your name?" He smiled. "You flatter me. But yes, it was recovered from the scene, I understand." "Recovered," Tommy repeated. "Interesting word. Usually implies ownership." Denham met his gaze calmly. "You're treading close to matters that no longer concern you, Beresford. Let sleeping wars lie. The dead have earned their rest." "And the guilty?" Tuppence asked. He looked at her for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. "They have excellent lawyers." He turned to go, but paused at the door. "If I were you, Mrs. Beresford, I'd destroy that envelope you claim to have. Curiosity can become a terminal condition." And he was gone. Tommy locked the door behind him. "He's rattled." That wasn't a warning. It was fear in evening dress. Tuppence moved to the mantel, staring into the low glow of the fire. He knows the real confession's still somewhere. That's why he's desperate to control the false one. He also knows we won't stop. She turned, her expression calm and dangerous. Then he'll have to keep up. Tommy poured another whiskey, handed it to her. To Mrs. Vale. Tuppence raised the glass. To Evans. To truth that refuses to stay buried. They drank. A faint rustle came from the letterbox. Tommy crossed the room swiftly, bent, and retrieved an envelope pushed halfway through. No address, no seal, just 2 words in neat block letters. The archive, Nightfall. He turned it over. The reverse side bore a small embossed finch. Tuppence met his gaze. The missing testimony. "Or a trap," Tommy said. "Perhaps both." She smiled faintly. "Either way, we'll be on time." The clock struck midnight. Somewhere outside, a car engine started, idled for a moment, then drove away. Inside, the Beresfords stood together in the quiet, the paper between them, a ghost's final whisper leading them toward the truth that had already cost 3 lives. "It's never the big offices that keep secrets," said Tuppence, studying the address Tommy had scribbled. "It's the small, ordinary rooms with lace curtains and people who remember everything." "Pimlico," Tommy read aloud. "A boarding house 2 days before Evan's death. If he trusted anyone outside Whitehall, it was someone unimportant enough to be overlooked." "Which, in government terms, could mean a woman with a typewriter," said Tuppence. "Let's pay her a call before the powers that be file us under missing, presumed inconvenient." The house on Lorimer Street was one of those resigned-looking buildings that had accepted its fate decades ago. The brass bell was polished by habit, not pride, and the hallway smelled faintly of furniture polish and boiled potatoes. A thin woman in a cardigan appeared, her hair wound tight as a punctuation mark. "Yes?" "Mrs. Beresford," said Tuppence pleasantly. "My husband and I were hoping to speak with Miss Brant. We were told she used to type for the Foreign Office." The landlady hesitated. "Miss Brant's not well this morning." "Then this afternoon will do perfectly," Tuppence said with a smile that brooked no contradiction. "Tell her it concerns an old friend, Mr. Evans." That name had the desired effect. The woman's expression flickered. "Second floor, front, but she tires easily." The room was small and full of paper. Typewriter ribbons, worn carbon sheets, envelopes bundled with string, an archive of forgotten correspondences. Miss Brant herself sat by the window, her spectacles thick enough to qualify as armour. Tuppence approached gently. "Miss Brant, I'm Tuppence Beresford. This is my husband, Tommy. We're trying to piece together something that happened a few months ago. A man named George Evans came to you." The old typist regarded them shrewdly. "I thought someone might one day." "You remember him then?" Tommy asked. "Oh yes, a polite man. Nervous hands. He brought a long statement, pages of it. Said he couldn't trust the ministry copyists. He wanted it done quietly. Paid me from his own pocket." "What was in the statement?" Her fingers trembled as they rested on the arm of her chair. "I didn't read it, but he said it was his insurance. If anything happens to me, this will speak, he told me." She looked at them sharply. "Something did happen, didn't it?" "Yes," Tuppence said softly. "He died before he could deliver it." Miss Brant closed her eyes for a moment. "Then I did right to hide it." "Hide it?" "I put the original in an envelope, sealed it, addressed it only, to be opened if I'm gone. Then I gave it to my nephew, Eddie Brant, works for the railway at Dover. Sensible boy. I told him never to hand it over except to someone who gave the password." "Password?" asked Tommy. She smiled faintly. "Sparrow sings at 11. The words hung between them like a ghost come home. Tuppence caught her breath. "Miss Brant, that phrase, Evans used it himself. It's the key to the whole business." "Then you'd best find Eddie," the old woman said, "because others have asked too. A man from the ministry, tall, charming, said he only wanted to recover misplaced papers. I told him nothing, but he frightened me." "Arthur Denham," Tommy muttered. "Yes, that was the name." Tuppence rose. "We'll leave at once. You've done enough, Miss Brant, more than you know." The typist nodded wearily. "Mind you keep the faith, dears. The truth's a shy bird, but it sings when it must." By late afternoon, the Beresfords were back in their flat, a map spread across the dining table and a sense of tightening urgency between them. "Dover," said Tuppence, tapping the coast. "The nephew works the night shift on the 11:30 to Calais." Tommy scribbled a message. "I'll telegraph the station master, code form under my old bureau credentials. Have him keep the boy in the office till you arrive." "You're not coming?" He shook his head. "If both of us appear, it'll draw attention. I'll follow by car, quietly. You take the train from Victoria, arrives Dover just before 11. She met his gaze. "Denham's ahead of us, Tommy." "I know, but he doesn't know you as well as I do." Tuppence smiled grimly. "Poor man. He'll learn." The train rattled southward through the dark, its rhythm a nervous heartbeat against the window pane. The compartment smelled of coal smoke and upholstery polish. Tuppence sat alone, gloved hands folded on her lap, eyes fixed on her reflection in the glass. She thought of Mrs. Vale's still face, of Miss Brant's trembling voice, of the document that had already cost so many lives. At each stop, she watched the platform carefully. Once she glimpsed a familiar silhouette, a man in a grey hat, watching the carriages but not boarding. Her pulse quickened. Denham's men were out. At Folkestone, the guard leaned in. "Next stop, Dover, ma'am." "Thank you." She reached for her bag. Inside lay the small revolver Tommy had pressed upon her earlier. Purely precautionary, he'd said, but she remembered the weight of his eyes more than his words. The train whistled into the night. The Dover platform was almost deserted, only the hiss of steam and the shuffle of a porter closing gates. Tuppence found the telegraph office easily. A young man in uniform looked up as she entered. "Mrs. Beresford?" "Yes, Eddie Brant." "That's me, ma'am. You said it was about Aunt Elsie." "She told us you have something important, something she asked you to keep safe." The boy hesitated. "I don't like handing things over without proof." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Then perhaps this will do." She leaned closer and whispered, "The sparrow sings at 11. His eyes widened. "Right enough." She said those very words. He turned to the cabinet behind him, unlocking a drawer. From inside, he drew a plain envelope, aged, unmarked except for the faint pencil scrawl. G.E. Tuppence exhaled. "That's it." But before she could reach for it, a voice from the doorway said, "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Beresford." Arthur Denham stood there, immaculate as ever, though the smile he wore was thin as a blade. In his hand, a revolver gleamed under the electric light. "Good evening," he said. "I was beginning to think you'd missed the train." Eddie froze. "Who are you?" "An official," Denham said smoothly. "And this is official business." Tuppence's tone was cool. "You're late, Mr. Denham. We've already collected the document." "Unlikely," he said. "You're still breathing." He gestured toward the boy. "Hand it over, lad." Eddie's eyes darted to Tuppence. "Aunt Elsie said—" "She also said to stay alive," Tuppence cut in quickly. "Do as he says, for now." The boy obeyed, placing the envelope on the table. Denham took it, inspected the seal, and slipped it into his coat. "Touching," he said softly. "Evans's last sermon. You've no idea how long I've waited to close this chapter." "Close or erase?" Tuppence asked. He smiled without warmth. "Words are malleable things, Mrs. Beresford, especially in the hands of patriots." From outside came the distant clang of a ship's bell, muffled by mist. Denham cocked his head. "Perfect timing. The Dover ferry sails in 10 minutes, and I've a berth reserved." He gestured with the gun. "We'll walk together." They moved through the maze of narrow streets toward the harbour. The fog lay thick now, curling around the lamps like smoke from an unseen fire. The slap of water against the pier mingled with the echo of their footsteps. Tuppence walked slightly ahead, heart hammering, mind racing. Somewhere behind them, Tommy would be arriving, if luck and petrol held. "Such a pity," Denham murmured conversationally. "Evans was a fool. He believed truth was its own defence. He never understood that in wartime truth must be managed like gunpowder. Meaning it explodes if handled by the wrong hands. Exactly. I only managed it a little too well." They reached the edge of the quay. Beyond the mist, a ferry horn moaned. Denham gestured toward the gangway. "After you." Tuppence hesitated. "And if I refuse?" He smiled. "Then you'll make a smaller splash." A voice behind them said quietly, "Drop the melodrama, Denham. You're late for your own funeral." Denham spun round. Sir Michael Harcourt stepped from the fog like judgment given human form. His overcoat was buttoned, his pistol steady. "Put it down, Arthur," he said. Denham laughed softly. "Ah, the great man himself, come to tidy his own desk." "This has gone far enough." "Oh, it went too far the moment you let Evans live long enough to write his statement." Denham's tone sharpened. "You used me, Michael. Finch wasn't an operation. It was a cover for your exchanges with the Swiss. You traded files for favours and let me take the fall." Harcourt's face remained expressionless. "You forget I gave you your career." "And I'm repaying you with interest," Denham hissed. "Once I reach France with this document, they'll pay handsomely for confirmation that the British lion has a serpent's tail." Tuppence saw the muscles in Harcourt's jaw tighten. "You'll never leave this quay?" "Then we'll go together," Denham snapped, swinging the gun between them. The fog thickened, muffling sound, blurring shapes. A shot cracked, sharp and startling. Then another. Tuppence ducked instinctively. Eddie shouted. Somewhere in the grey swirl, footsteps scuffled, a cry echoed, and silence followed, deep and final. When the mist cleared enough to see, Denham lay against the stone bollard, eyes open, gun fallen beside him. Harcourt stood a few paces away, breathing hard, his pistol lowered. "He fired first," he said quietly. "You saw it." Tuppence nodded, though her gaze was fixed on the envelope now lying half-soaked beside Denham's hand. Tommy's voice came from the shadows behind. "I saw it too." He stepped forward, having arrived just in time for the last act. "Nice of you to save us the paperwork, Sir Michael," he said dryly, "though you might have spared us the fog." Harcourt's eyes moved to him, weary but sharp. "You'll never understand, Beresford. Some secrets preserve nations." Tommy bent, retrieving the envelope. "And some merely preserve men." He slipped it into his coat. "We'll let the government decide which this is." Harcourt's voice dropped. "Be careful what you uncover. History has teeth." Tommy looked at him evenly. "So have we." By dawn the fog had lifted, leaving the harbour quiet and cold. In a small cafe overlooking the pier, Tuppence warmed her hands around a cup of coffee while Tommy examined the dry pages of Evans' statement. "It's all here," he said. "Dates, names, coded exchanges. Finch was a black market intelligence swap authorised without sanction. Evans found out, confronted Denham, and was silenced. Harcourt covered it to protect the ministry's reputation." "And now both of them are ghosts," Tuppence said softly. "History will tidy them away." "Will it tidy us?" He smiled faintly. "We're the untidy part of history. Someone has to be. She leaned back, exhaustion threading through her voice. So it ends. The traitor unmasked, the witness found. Tommy folded the document carefully, and Evans finally believed. Outside, the first ferry of the morning blew its horn, long, low, and strangely peaceful. Tuppence rose, slipping her arm through his. "Let's go home, Tommy. I've had enough of governments for one lifetime." He laughed softly. "Until the next letter arrives." They stepped into the pale light, the sea behind them murmuring secrets that no file could hold. And somewhere above the harbour, a sparrow began to sing. London looked scrubbed clean the next morning, as if the night's fog had washed away not just the grime, but the city's composure. The Beresfords' taxi rattled along Whitehall, past the parade of ministries whose facades were expressions of eternal secrecy. Tuppence watched the stone lions flanking the steps of the Foreign Office. "They look pleased with themselves," she said. "Perhaps they've swallowed another scandal whole." Tommy smiled thinly. "Then let's see if they can digest this one." In his briefcase lay the recovered envelope from Dover, Evans' complete testimony, the paper that had already claimed 4 lives and threatened to end several careers. He felt its weight like a moral burden rather than a physical one. A messenger met them at the side entrance. "Sir Michael Harcourt is expecting you in the secure conference room, sir." Tommy nodded. "Lead on, Macduff." The room was windowless, panelled in dark oak that smelled faintly of pipe smoke and nervous decisions. A single lamp cast a disciplined circle of light over the long table. Harcourt stood at its head, immaculate as ever, though a bandage showed beneath his cuff, a reminder of the previous night's confrontation. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he began with weary formality. "This meeting is off the record, as I'm sure you understand." "Everything in your department seems to be," Tuppence said, removing her gloves with deliberate grace. He ignored the jab. "You have in your possession a document belonging to His Majesty's government." Tommy placed the envelope on the table. "We have a document belonging to George Evans. He died trying to make sure it wasn't buried." For the first time, Harcourt's composure faltered. He reached for the file, fingers trembling slightly as he opened it. His eyes moved quickly down the typed lines, the meticulous narrative of betrayal, names, payments, exchanges, and cover-ups. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, almost human. "So he finished it after all." "Miss Brant typed it," said Tuppence. "Mrs. Vale helped hide it. Denham tried to erase it. You protected him. The chain is complete." Harcourt looked up sharply. "You think I protected him out of friendship?" Tommy met his gaze evenly. "Out of fear, perhaps." Harcourt closed the folder and exhaled. "Very well. You deserve the truth, or what's left of it." He moved to the windowless wall as though searching for air that wasn't there. Arthur Denham was a traitor, not by ideology, but by opportunity. During the war, he sold coded information through a Swiss intermediary. Pocket change, he called it. I discovered it in 45. The logical course would have been prosecution. But we were rebuilding an intelligence service held together by string and good intentions. A public scandal then would have crippled us. We needed the facade of integrity more than the fact of it. "So you made yourself his accomplice," said Tuppence quietly. "I made myself his keeper. I kept him close, fed him assignments that couldn't harm us, watched every move he made. For years it worked, until Evans." "Evans stumbled across the old reports," Tommy said. "Exactly. He was brilliant but moral to a fault. He believed exposure was duty. I believed containment was survival. He refused to destroy the evidence. Denham panicked. You know the rest." "Evans dead," Mrs. Vale silenced, "and you still pulling the strings," Tuppence said bitterly. Harcourt's eyes hardened. "Do not mistake necessity for cruelty, Mrs. Beresford. The stability of this country rests on secrets too heavy for public virtue." "Then perhaps it deserves to wobble," she replied. The latch clicked before anyone spoke again. Denham stepped inside, pale but composed, a pistol levelled with surgical steadiness. "I couldn't leave it at Dover," he said softly. "You always underestimated me, Michael." 2 guards lay motionless in the corridor behind him. The air smelled faintly of cordite. "Put it down, Arthur," Harcourt said. "Not until I have the file." "It's here." Harcourt's hand rested on it lightly. "But even if you burn it, copies exist." "Then I'll burn the room." Tuppence's voice cut through the tension like a wire. "You've killed enough people for your comfort, Mr. Denham." He turned to her. "You think I wanted their deaths? Evans forced my hand. Harcourt forced my silence. I served a country that paid me with suspicion and betrayal, so I paid it back in kind." "By selling its secrets?" Tommy asked. Denham's jaw tightened. "By surviving." He moved closer to the table. "Slide it across." Harcourt hesitated, then did so. But his other hand was moving too, toward the drawer where his service revolver waited. Denham saw the motion, swung his pistol and fired. The report was deafening in the closed room. Harcourt staggered, a bloom of red spreading across his shirt, but he stayed on his feet. "You'll never leave this building." Denham's reply was another shot, wild this time, shattering the lamp and plunging them into half-darkness. Tuppence ducked instinctively. Tommy launched himself across the table. The two men collided, crashing against the chair legs. The pistol skittered across the parquet. Denham struck out viciously, catching Tommy on the cheek. Tommy answered with a punch that drove the breath from him. "Always the amateur hero," Denham hissed. "And you, the professional coward." They grappled, rolling across the floor toward the spilled light from the broken lamp. Denham clawed for the weapon, but Tuppence's foot found it first. She kicked it away, sending it clattering beneath a cabinet. Tommy seized the moment, pinning Denham's arm until the man sagged, defeated, gasping. From the far side of the room, Harcourt slumped into a chair, blood soaking his cuff. "Enough," he said hoarsely. "It's finished." Denham looked up at him, eyes full of bitter triumph. "Nothing's finished. You'll be the one in the dock, not me." "Perhaps," Harcourt said and coughed, "but you'll be the exhibit." Within minutes, the guards, revived and reinforced, had Denham in custody and a doctor tending Harcourt's wound. The pistol lay on the table beside Evans's file, an emblem of truth and consequence. Tuppence opened the document at last. The typewritten pages rustled faintly, the ink dark, the signature unmistakable. "George Evans, June 1947. She read aloud a few lines, voice steady. "I write this not as vengeance but as safeguard. Two men within the ministry, Arthur Denham and Michael Harcourt, authorized transmissions beyond sanction. Payments were received through Zurich intermediaries. I was ordered to remain silent. I choose not to." Tommy met Harcourt's gaze. "That's pretty explicit." "Yes," Harcourt said quietly. He left no room for interpretation. "And yet," Tuppence said, "he still calls it safeguard, not exposure. He didn't want destruction, just honesty." Harcourt's mouth twisted in pain or irony. "Honesty is a luxury for the living, Mrs. Beresford. Evans believed nations could survive it. I wasn't so sure." The door opened again. Inspector Grant stepped in, hat in hand. "Heard there was some excitement. Seems every time you two get near Whitehall, the mortality rate rises." Tommy smiled faintly. "We bring sunshine wherever we go." Grant nodded toward Denham, who sat handcuffed and silent. "He'll hang," the inspector said, "though I doubt the papers will say for what." "No," Harcourt murmured. "The papers will call it a security incident. They always do." Later, after the ambulance had taken Harcourt away and Denham was led under guard, the Beresfords found themselves alone in the deserted corridor. The hush of bureaucracy after hours hung heavy. Distant typewriters, the faint smell of ink and floor polish. Tuppence broke the silence. "We did it. The truth's out." "Partly," said Tommy. "That's all truth ever manages." He looked at her, half smiling. "Still feel like pushing someone under a bus?" "Only metaphorically. Harcourt, perhaps, or whichever minister writes the official statement." Tommy's grin faded. "Do you think Evans will be cleared?" "Not officially, but somewhere in the archives his signature will remain. Stubborn as conscience. That's enough." They turned toward the exit, their footsteps echoing along the corridor like punctuation marks at the end of a long confession. Outside, the afternoon sun caught the river, scattering light across the bridges. The city had resumed its indifferent hum. Clerks hurried, buses groaned, the world moved on. Tuppence leaned against the parapet overlooking the Thames. "Strange thing, Justice," she said. "It arrives like the post, late, misdelivered, and usually missing the enclosure." Tommy laughed softly. "But it arrives." From his coat he drew the carbon copy of Evans' statement, Miss Brandt's duplicate, rescued before anyone thought to search her room. "Grant will file the original in the vaults. This one should go somewhere safer. Where? The mantelpiece? He shook his head. With the people it was written for, the honest ones still inside the system, I can think of 2. Tuppence smiled. Then send it, but keep one line for us. He read the last paragraph again, slowly. If these words are found, let them stand not as accusation but reminder that secrecy without conscience is treason in all but name. They stood in silence, the words settling like dust after a storm. That evening they returned briefly to the little church where Mrs. Vale had died. The vestry was restored now, fresh candles, the scent of lilies. The vicar greeted them quietly and left them alone. Tuppence placed a small bouquet on the pew. She wanted to make things right. I hope she knows we finished it. She knows, Tommy said. If anyone's allowed to haunt Whitehall, it'll be her. Tuppence smiled faintly. And Evans? He's probably filing reports somewhere celestial, complaining about inefficiency. She laughed, a small, tired sound, then looked toward the altar. We've seen too much of death dressed as duty, Tommy. He took her hand. Then perhaps we should take a holiday dressed as indifference. Somewhere with honest weather and dishonest cocktails? Precisely. 3 days later, as they packed for Devon, the Morning Post arrived. Among the bills and circulars was an envelope bearing the Foreign Office crest. Inside, a single typed line read, "The matter of Operation Finch is closed. The record will show George Evans served with honour. No further inquiry is advised." Below it, a handwritten note in a different ink. "Thank you, M.H." Tuppence stared at it for a long moment. He survived then. Tommy folded the note carefully. Survived or was allowed to. Either way, it's done, she nodded. Until the next adventure knocks, he grinned. It always does. You make sure of that. She slipped her arm through his. Come along, Mr. Beresford. Let's leave the espionage to the professionals and remind ourselves what sunlight looks like. As they stepped into the morning, London shimmered with ordinary life. Newspapers flapping, a flower seller calling, buses rumbling toward Piccadilly. Tommy looked back once at the great grey towers of Whitehall. Strange place, the heart of power, he murmured. Beats loudly enough, but you can never tell if it's alive. Tuppence squeezed his arm. Then let's keep our own hearts honest. They walked on, their figures receding into the bustle until they were just another married couple in post-war London, 2 small guardians of truth in a city built on secrets. And somewhere, far above the river's gleam, a sparrow sang at 11. There are mornings when London seems determined to behave. The air outside South Audley Mansions carried a brightness uncharacteristic of the city's October temperament, and even the milkman whistled as though the entire capital had chosen civility for once. Inside the Beresfords' flat, the calm was nearly suspicious. The kettle hummed, the radio murmured something about cricket, and the faint aroma of buttered toast drifted from the tray. Tuppence, still in her dressing gown, poured hot water into the teapot with the solemn precision of a chemist performing an experiment. There, she announced. If civilization collapses today, it won't be because of bad tea. Tommy, half hidden behind the Morning Chronicle, made a non-committal noise. She frowned. Don't grunt like a statesman. Speak. He lowered the paper. It appears civilization isn't collapsing after all, only reshuffling its guilt. Listen to this. He cleared his throat in mock official tones. Foreign Office scandal. Names withheld. A statement issued last night confirms that an internal irregularity has been resolved. The government expresses confidence that no further inquiry is necessary. Tuppence stared. Resolved? That's rather like saying the Titanic experienced a brief inconvenience. Tommy folded the paper. They've managed to turn murder, treason, and bureaucratic cover-up into 12 lines between advertisements for hair tonic. She sighed. They always do. History will have to do the shouting for them. She carried the tray to the table and sat opposite him. The clink of china, the comfort of ritual, it felt indecently domestic after weeks of shadows and gunfire. I keep thinking of Evans, she said softly. He wanted truth to mean something. It still does, Tommy replied, just not to everyone at the same time. She looked at him over the rim of her cup. That's a very Whitehall answer, darling. Occupational hazard. I spent too long pretending to be respectable. You're improving, she said. You've started to sound cynical. He smiled. And you've started to sound philosophical. Terrifying combination. The clock on the mantel ticked discreetly. Somewhere below, the porter's broom scratched across the courtyard stones. For the first time in days, the ordinary world seemed trustworthy again. Tuppence reached for the sugar bowl. Do you think Harcourt will recover? Grant said he would. Enough to face a committee or two, I expect. They'll give him a knighthood for his silence and a holiday for his guilt. And Denham? Dead on arrival. Tommy's tone was flat but not unkind. He always was, in a way. She nodded, stirring her tea with slow, thoughtful circles. Then that's 4 graves and 1 headline to show for it. Plus 1 commendation, perhaps, said Tommy, glancing at the unopened post on the sideboard. You know officialdom. They never miss a chance to thank you for cleaning up their mess. Tuppence slit the envelope with a butter knife. The paper within was thick and self-important. The seal bore the familiar lion rampant. She read aloud. The Prime Minister presents his compliments to Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Beresford and extends gratitude for their discreet assistance in a matter of national security. Their services, while unofficial, have been of material value to the Crown. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Discreet assistance, Bean, that's bureaucratese for please forget everything you've learned. Tuppence grinned. It's rather like being thanked for dusting under the carpet. He took the letter, scanned it and chuckled. Signed by a secretary, naturally. The Prime Minister's too busy pretending nothing happened. Well, at least it's not a subpoena. She placed the letter beside the teapot. I might frame it, hang it between the Times crossword and your demobilization certificate. That'll impress visitors. Exactly. When they ask what it means, I shall say we once helped save England between breakfast and luncheon. Tommy leaned back, balancing his chair on 2 legs. You know, Tuppence, every time we promise ourselves peace and quiet, we end up knee-deep in treason. That's because you can't sit still. Untrue. I'm sitting perfectly still now. You're balancing like a schoolboy and threatening the teacups. Sit properly before you overthrow the Empire again. He obeyed with mock solemnity. Yes, Prime Minister. She laughed, the sound bright and relieving. You're incorrigible. Admit it, you'd be bored without me. Not at all, she said, eyes sparkling. I could take up embroidery, or espionage for the French, something restful. They fell into companionable silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the newspaper as Tommy refolded it. Outside, a delivery lorry backfired, a reminder that London remained stubbornly alive. Tuppence reached for the plate of toast. You realise, of course, that history will never record any of this. That's precisely why we can afford to talk about it over breakfast, she smiled. Sometimes the traitor's testimony is only heard by history. He looked at her thoughtfully. And sometimes by a woman with an inconvenient conscience. The clock chimed 11. Tuppence rose to refill the pot just as a firm knock sounded at the door. Good heavens, she said. If that's Mrs. Simmons collecting for the church bazaar, tell her we're impoverished patriots. Tommy went to the door. Through the frosted glass he saw the outline of a uniformed messenger. He opened it to find a young constable, cap in hand. Delivery for Mr. Beresford from Scotland Yard. Tommy took the envelope, nodded thanks and closed the door. Tuppence eyed it warily. Another thank you note. We'll need a scrapbook soon. He tore it open. A single sheet bore Inspector Grant's neat handwriting. Thought you'd like to know the Foreign Office inquiry is officially concluded. No prosecutions, no headlines. The nation sleeps easier, though perhaps not wiser. P.S. If you and the missus fancy something quieter, I've a friend in the yard who's lost a rather valuable Persian cat. Reward substantial. Tommy read it aloud. Tuppence nearly spilled the milk. A cat? After traitors and ministers, that sounds positively therapeutic. He folded the note with mock gravity. Shall I wire back that we accept? Only if the cat answers to Sparrow. They laughed together, the sound light but edged with something older and wiser. The afternoon sun had shifted, laying a gentle warmth across the sitting-room carpet. Tuppence drew the curtains halfway, letting in just enough light to gild the furniture. Do you ever think, she said quietly, that we spend our lives tidying up other people's mistakes? Tommy looked up from the crossword he'd started. Yes, but we're rather good at it. She tilted her head. And if the mistakes are too large? Then we make tea, he said simply, and start again. For a moment they were silent. Two small figures in the grand, untidy business of empire and ordinary life. Then the doorbell rang again, brisk, insistent, undeniably promising. Tuppence met his eyes. "Shall we pretend we're out?" Tommy smiled. "We never are." He rose, straightened his tie, and crossed the room. As the latch clicked open, the scene froze for a heartbeat. Teapot steaming, morning light slanting across the table, and the world about to turn once more. A voice unseen spoke from the hall. "Mr. Beresford? Mrs. Beresford? There's been an incident." Tuppence sighed contentedly, settling back in her chair. "I knew it. Next time remind me to wish for something duller than a cat." Tommy laughed as he disappeared into the doorway. "Impossible, darling. You attract intrigue the way marmalade attracts wasps." The door closed, the teapot hissed faintly, and the clock marked the next minute of adventure. Somewhere beyond South Audley Mansions, London's vast heart continued its rhythm, steady, secretive, and alive. And inside their small flat, the Beresfords were once again at the threshold between peace and peril, smiling, debating, and quite incapable of resisting the knock of mystery.